Imagine this. You're sitting at home, cozy on your couch, maybe sipping your evening coffee, when you hear a breaking news alert pop up on your phone. Small town rocked by shocking murder, authorities baffled. You glance at the headline, feeling that tiny spark of curiosity we all get when real life suddenly feels more like a crime thriller. But here's the kicker: before the day even ends, detectives announce they've cracked the case. That's right. A murder mystery that should have dragged on for weeks, months even, was solved in record time, and the key to it all? A tiny hidden clue, almost invisible to the naked eye, overlooked by everyone except one sharp-eyed investigator. Now, before you even blink, you might be wondering the same thing that thousands of others did when the story exploded across news feeds, Reddit threads, and TikTok crime communities. What was the clue? How did they find it so fast? Well, stick around, because that's exactly the journey I'm about to take you on, and I promise you, you're not going to want to miss a single second. The answer you're searching for? You will get it right here, in this very video. No frustrating half-stories, no endless dragging just to keep you hooked. I'll walk you through every twist, every turn, every psychological slip-up that gave the killer away, but trust me, the full truth will be even more jaw-dropping than you think. Now, let's get real for a second. True crime isn't just about gory details or shocking headlines, is it? It's about understanding people, the ones who commit these acts, the ones who solve them, and sometimes, the ones who become heroes without ever realizing it. That's why, if you're anything like me, you're not here just to hear what happened. You're here because deep down you want to feel the mystery unfold. You want to put yourself in the shoes of the detective, the bystander, even if you dare, in the mind of the suspect. And that's exactly what we're going to do together. I'm not just going to tell you the story. I'm going to pull you inside it, like you were right there when everything went down. So before we dive any deeper, make me a deal. Stay with me till the very end. I promise you, once you hear the final twist, you'll realize why this case is unlike anything you've ever heard before. Fair enough? It all began on an ordinary Thursday morning in a sleepy Midwestern town you've probably never heard of unless you live nearby. Picture it: rows of neat houses, well-tended lawns, the smell of fresh-cut grass lingering in the air. The kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked, where everyone knows everyone else's business, and where the biggest scandal last year was when the mayor's dog won Best in Show at the county fair. But under that picture-perfect surface, something was festering. A darkness no one saw coming. When neighbors noticed the old Simmons house sitting eerily quiet for 2 days, newspapers piling up on the porch, curtains drawn tightly shut, it didn't take long before someone placed a concerned call to the local police. A welfare check, they said, just to be sure everything was okay. It should have been routine. In fact, Officer Jenna Matthews, the young rookie assigned to the call, joked to her partner that she was probably about to interrupt some retiree's afternoon nap. But what she found behind that heavy oak door would change her life, and the town's forever. Now, I want you to picture Jenna. Not a hardened veteran with decades of experience. No, Jenna had just graduated from the academy 2 years prior, full of that fresh-faced optimism that crime shows like NCIS and Criminal Minds often glamorize. She was smart, yes, but more importantly, she trusted her instincts, something no textbook could teach her. As soon as she stepped inside the Simmons home, every hair on the back of her neck stood on end. The place smelled wrong. You know that coppery, metallic scent they always mention in crime dramas? Turns out it's real. And Jenna smelled it the moment she crossed the threshold. The living room was untouched, a cup of cold coffee on the side table, a crossword puzzle half-finished. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows. But in the back of the house, inside the dimly lit master bedroom, lay the body of Martin Simmons, the town's beloved retired history teacher. And it didn't take a forensics expert to realize he hadn't died peacefully in his sleep. This, right here, is where things start to get tricky. Most murder investigations stretch out for days, weeks, even months. Leads dry up. Suspects lawyer up. Evidence gets contaminated. But not this time. From the moment Jenna radioed in for backup, something about the crime scene nagged at her. A detail so small, so seemingly meaningless, that even the seasoned detectives might have missed it. But not Jenna. Not today. And it was because of that one observation, that one hidden clue, that the entire case unraveled at lightning speed. Now, if you're like me, you're already leaning in closer, trying to guess what that clue could have been. Was it a fingerprint? A hair? Some trace of DNA left behind in a fit of carelessness? Let's just say you're thinking too big. The clue was much smaller, much subtler. And once you find out what it was, it's going to blow your mind just like it did the detectives on scene. Before we get there, though, you need to understand something about Martin Simmons. In every story like this, there's more to the victim than meets the eye. Martin wasn't just a retired schoolteacher. He was also a bit of a local historian, obsessed with preserving the town's forgotten past. He kept detailed journals, collected rare artifacts, and even dabbled in amateur detective work, helping police with minor investigations back in the day. Martin knew secrets, lots of them. And not all of them were the kind you tell over coffee at the diner. Some of them, it turns out, were dangerous. And someone, it seems, was desperate enough to silence him before those secrets could see the light of day. By now, you might be wondering, who would want an old man dead? What could he have possibly known that was worth killing for? And what about that hidden clue? Where does it fit in? Don't worry. Every one of those questions is about to be answered. But I want you to keep this in mind as we move forward. In real-life mysteries, the truth is rarely clean. It's messy, complicated, and full of shadows. And in this case, the shadows ran deeper than anyone could have guessed. The town quickly descended into chaos. Word spread like wildfire across Facebook groups, Twitter feeds, and local news channels. Everyone had a theory. Some said it was a robbery gone wrong. Others whispered about old grudges, scandalous affairs, and even a rumored buried treasure Martin had supposedly hidden somewhere on his property. You see how fast people spiral when fear takes root? That's another thing about small towns. When something like this happens, the fear doesn't stay behind closed doors. It leaks out, infecting everyone. And when fear runs high, people start pointing fingers. But amidst all the noise, Jenna stayed focused. She went back to the house later that evening, long after the crime scene tape was up and the forensic team had packed away their gear. Something still bothered her, a tiny, nagging feeling she couldn't shake. She retraced her steps, moving through the house slowly, methodically. And that's when she spotted it. Tucked beneath the edge of a throw rug in the hallway, nearly invisible unless you were looking for it, was a single torn scrap of paper. Just big enough to have writing on it. Just small enough to miss entirely. And what was written on it? Well, let's just say it turned the entire case upside down in an instant. And that, my friends, is where the real story begins. It's crazy to think how such a small piece of paper could hold the weight of life and death, but that's exactly what Jenna realized as she knelt there, heart hammering in her chest, staring at that jagged scrap barely peeking out from under the rug. When she carefully lifted it, she noticed something immediately. This wasn't ordinary stationery. No, not at all. It was thicker, almost like the type of parchment used for official documents or certificates, and scribbled across it in rushed, uneven handwriting were just 3 words. He knows everything. No signature. No date. Just that ominous message, as raw and chilling as if it had been whispered directly into Jenna's ear. She bagged it carefully, her mind already racing. Who wrote it? Was it meant for Martin? Did he write it himself? A desperate last warning before he died? Or worse, had the killer dropped it by mistake? Suddenly, the whole murder scene shifted in her mind. This wasn't random. This wasn't opportunistic. This was personal, and whoever did it had something massive to lose. Now, before we start drawing our own conclusions, let's slow down and really look at Martin Simmons. Not the version painted by sympathetic news anchors or nostalgic neighbors, but the real man. Over the past few months before his death, Martin had become increasingly reclusive. According to those close to him, he pulled back from his usual social circles. He stopped attending the local trivia nights he used to dominate. He even started missing his regular Sunday morning breakfasts at Linda's Diner, a ritual so set in stone that people joked the town's calendar revolved around it. Rumors started swirling, as they always do in a place where privacy is more myth than reality. Some said Martin had stumbled across something while digging through old town archives. Others whispered about a bitter feud he had reignited with a former colleague, a man named Doug Hanley, who also happened to be Martin's oldest friend turned most complicated enemy. Doug's name wasn't the only one floating around either. There was Carly Reynolds, a struggling real estate agent who had been seen arguing with Martin in the parking lot of the town's library just 2 weeks before his death. Witnesses said their confrontation was heated, something about land ownership and disputed property lines. Carly, by all accounts, was desperate, in serious debt, with rumors of foreclosure haunting her like a bad smell. Then there was Eric Simmons, Martin's own nephew, a hot-headed drifter who had recently blown back into town after years of radio silence, reportedly asking Martin for money. Some folks said Martin refused him. Others said Eric had threatened him. No one knew for sure, but everyone agreed that Eric had trouble written all over him. Add to that a recent break-in at the Historical Society, a fire that destroyed decades of records, and a few cryptic posts on local Facebook groups about the past refusing to stay buried, and suddenly the peaceful town of Crestwood looked less like a postcard and more like the setting for one of those Dateline NBC specials where the killer ends up being someone the victim trusted the most. And still, hanging over it all like a storm cloud, was that tiny scrap of paper Jenna found, proof that Martin knew something dangerous. Maybe too dangerous for his own good. The deeper police dug into his recent activities, the stranger things got. Security footage from a nearby gas station showed Martin nervously checking over his shoulder multiple times in the days leading up to his death. He wasn't a man at ease. He wasn't just being cautious, he was scared. Cell phone records revealed a series of calls placed to an unlisted number, a number that, when traced, led not to an individual but to a burner phone, now conveniently disconnected. Neighbors mentioned seeing strange cars parked near Martin's home late at night, their engines running but their headlights off. Each of these pieces, on their own, could have been written off. Together, they painted a picture of a man living in fear, surrounded by threats he either didn't fully understand or, tragically, understood all too well. It would have been easy to settle on one suspect. Eric, with his criminal record and explosive temper, practically came gift-wrapped with motive. But something about it felt too easy to Jenna. Too scripted. Like someone wanted Eric to take the fall. And when Eric provided a solid alibi, backed up by time-stamped footage from a dive bar an hour away, attention shifted back to Carly Reynolds, whose financial troubles were no secret. But again, her story checked out. At the exact time of Martin's death, she was at a client meeting in another town, a meeting that half a dozen people could confirm. The further investigators stretched their net, the more dead ends they hit. It was like someone had wiped the board clean, leaving only the clue they wanted to be found. And that terrified Jenna more than anything else, because it meant she wasn't just chasing a killer. She was chasing a mind that had planned every step. As the investigation deepened, more secrets surfaced. Martin's journals, once thought to be harmless musings on local history, turned out to contain notes about illegal land deals, cover-ups, and hidden financial transactions involving some very prominent figures in town. One name, in particular, appeared again and again, scribbled in the margins, circled and underlined with growing urgency. Douglas Hanley. Remember him? Martin's old friend. The same Doug who had suddenly started hosting charity fundraisers and renovation projects in town, branding himself as a hometown hero. The Doug who had everything to lose if the truth came out. Still, Jenna knew better than to jump to conclusions. Doug had an airtight public image, friends in high places, and the kind of money that made problems disappear. If he was involved, proving it wouldn't be easy. And then there was the strange visit. 3 days before Martin was killed, a neighbor swore she saw a well-dressed man, one she didn't recognize, show up at Martin's doorstep. No one knew who he was, and no one had seen him since. When police pulled security footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera, the man's face was frustratingly obscured by a baseball cap and sunglasses. But something about his stance, the way he lingered at the edge of the Simmons property even after the door closed, sent shivers down Jenna's spine. Whoever he was, he wasn't just a lost tourist. At this point, you might be wondering if things could get any more tangled. Trust me, they do. Because just when investigators thought they were starting to piece together the puzzle, the case took a darker turn. The forensics lab processed the scrap of paper Jenna found under the rug. No fingerprints. No DNA. But when they examined the ink, they realized it was a rare kind, only sold at a handful of specialty stores across the state. One of those stores, it turned out, had a security system that recorded every transaction. And if Jenna's instincts were right, this wasn't just some random stranger. This was someone already entangled in the investigation. Someone everyone thought they could trust. But who?
And why?
And how far would they go to keep their secret buried? A man who, at first glance, looked painfully familiar. And buried deep in the footage, time-stamped just 2 weeks before Martin's death, was a man purchasing that very pen. Hold tight, because the real shocking twist is just around the corner. And believe me, it's going to change everything you thought you knew about this case. The closer Jenna got to the truth, the more it felt like the ground beneath her feet was shifting. Just when she thought she had something solid to build her case on, the footage from the specialty store, the rare ink that could finally tie the hidden message to someone specific, everything started to fall apart. She went to the police station that morning feeling like this was it, like maybe she was just hours away from putting the pieces together. But when she arrived, the detective assigned to Martin's case, a gruff middle-aged man named Sergeant Clark, gave her a look she would never forget. It was the kind of look that tells you bad news is coming, and it's coming fast. He informed her that the store's security footage was missing. Not corrupted. Not misplaced. Completely gone. Someone had accessed the station's evidence storage overnight, and even though the building had alarms, cameras, and key code entries, there were no signs of a break-in. Just a gap in the footage, like the key piece of evidence had been plucked from the world, as if it never existed. Jenna's stomach dropped. Whoever they were dealing with wasn't just smart. They had resources. They had connections. This wasn't random. This was someone sending a message. At first, Jenna thought maybe she was being paranoid. Maybe it was just a fluke. Maybe some tired officer made a mistake. But then, on her way back to her car, she found something tucked under her windshield wiper, a plain white envelope with her name handwritten across the front. No postage stamp. No return address. Inside was a single note, typed in blocky, anonymous letters. Stop digging or you'll be next. Her hands trembled as she read it. Not because she was afraid, well, maybe a little, but more because she realized just how deep this thing went. She wasn't chasing a simple killer. She was unearthing a whole world of secrets that the wrong people would do anything to keep hidden. She tucked the note carefully into her coat pocket, glanced around the empty parking lot, and drove away with her heart pounding in her ears. But Jenna wasn't the type to back down. If anything, the warning only made her more determined. She started looking into Martin's old journals again, trying to find something she missed. That's when she stumbled onto a name she hadn't noticed before. B. Carter. It didn't mean much at first. Just a scrawled reference in the margins, next to a line about unfinished business. But the deeper she dug, the more she realized that B. Carter was a name that had disappeared from Crestwood's history like it had been scrubbed clean. Old newspapers made passing mentions. A business deal gone wrong. A scandal involving town funds. But every time Jenna tried to pull records, she hit a wall. Files missing. Archives incomplete. It was as if B. Carter had been erased, wiped from existence, by someone with enough power to rewrite history. Desperate for answers, Jenna turned to one of the only people she thought she could trust, Detective Clark. After all, he had been the one who initially encouraged her to look deeper, to not just accept the easy answers. But when she met with him in a shadowy booth at a rundown diner on the edge of town, something about him seemed off. He was nervous, glancing around like he was being watched. His voice was lower than usual, almost like he was weighing every word before he said it. And then, right when she brought up B. Carter, he shut down completely. Told her to drop it. Told her she didn't know what she was messing with. That some things were better left buried. It wasn't just concern in his voice. It was fear. Real, tangible fear. And that's when a sick feeling twisted in Jenna's gut. Was Clark really on her side? Or had he been feeding her just enough information to keep her pointed in the wrong direction? Had he been playing her this whole time, using her curiosity against her? Before she could even process the possibility, Jenna received another shock. When she got home that night, she found her front door slightly ajar, the lock broken. Inside, it was chaos. Drawers pulled open, papers scattered, her laptop missing. Whoever had been there wasn't looking for valuables. They were after her notes. Her evidence. Everything she had collected about Martin, Doug Hanley, B. Carter, and the mysterious stranger. It was all gone. The message was clear as day. Back off or pay the price. And still, in the middle of all the destruction, there was one thing left untouched, a single photo taped to her fridge door. It was a grainy black and white shot, clearly taken without her knowing, showing Jenna talking to Martin Simmons weeks before his death. Scrawled across the bottom in red ink were the words, "You were part of it all along." The room spun around her as Jenna tried to make sense of what she was seeing. Was someone trying to frame her? Was this about making her look guilty? Or was it something worse? Was there a truth about Martin, about herself, that she had never even considered? And just when she thought she couldn't be more confused, her phone buzzed with a text from a blocked number. It simply read, "Meet me at the old quarry at midnight. Come alone if you want the truth." Jenna knew one thing for sure. Whoever was behind this was getting desperate. And desperate people are dangerous. The real nightmare was only just beginning. Jenna sat frozen in her wrecked living room, clutching the ominous text message in her hand, her mind racing through 100 worst-case scenarios. Midnight at the quarry. Alone. Whoever sent the message was dangling the truth just out of reach, knowing she was too far in to walk away now. She knew it could be a trap. Every instinct screamed it, but what choice did she have? If she didn't go, the questions would keep festering, the lies growing thicker, the danger mounting until it swallowed her whole. As she hurried to gather what little she could, a flashlight, a burner phone she kept for emergencies, a pocket knife she barely knew how to use, her regular phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't another block number. It was a name she hadn't seen in months, Eli Winters. An old friend. More like an ex-friend after a falling out Jenna barely remembered the details of anymore. She stared at the screen, heartbeat thundering, before answering. Eli's voice was frantic, low, almost conspiratorial. "Jenna, listen to me," he said before she could even speak. "Did you get a letter? Did someone leave you something? Because they got to me too. It's not just you. This thing is bigger than you think." Jenna's knees buckled slightly, and she sank onto the edge of the overturned coffee table. Eli explained he had found an envelope taped to his apartment door that morning. Same plain white design, same blocky typed message. "Stop digging, or suffer the consequences." The only difference was that Eli hadn't been investigating anything. He had no ties to Martin Simmons, no reason to be dragged into whatever this was, unless he wasn't telling the whole truth. Before Jenna could question him, Eli dropped a bombshell. "There's something you don't know about Martin," he said. "Something he was into. People he was involved with. This isn't just about one murder. It's a cover-up for something way, way bigger." He hesitated like he was about to say more, but then his voice cut out, the call ending abruptly with a sickening finality. Jenna tried calling him back, but the line was dead. Not busy. Not voicemail. Dead. As if he had been cut off completely. Fear curdled in her stomach, but also something else, a gnawing sense of betrayal. How much had Martin kept hidden from her? How much had Eli? With no time to waste, Jenna drove toward the quarry, the narrow country roads stretching dark and endless ahead of her. She kept checking her rearview mirror, half expecting headlights to appear out of nowhere, to see a shadowy vehicle tailing her. The night felt alive, charged with tension, every creak of the trees and flutter of the wind sounding louder than it should. When she finally pulled into the abandoned lot near the quarry, she killed her headlights and sat there for a moment, heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped animal. The place was eerily silent, a giant pit swallowed by blackness, the crumbling fences barely holding back the void. She was about to step out of the car when her burner phone vibrated violently in her jacket pocket. Another text. A photo this time. Grainy and dark, but unmistakable. It was Eli, bound to a chair, gagged, a fresh gash bleeding across his forehead. The caption underneath was simple and chilling. "You're not the only one who can lose everything." Jenna's breath caught in her throat. They had him. And if they could get to him so easily, they could get to her too. The realization hit her like a punch. This wasn't about justice anymore. It was about survival. She forced herself out of the car, scanning the empty lot, but no one appeared. No figure waiting in the shadows. No voice calling her name. Instead, lying on the cracked pavement near the entrance to the quarry, she found a small black USB drive, glinting faintly under the moonlight. It was almost too obvious, too perfectly placed. Part of her wanted to leave it where it was, to run back to the safety of her car and pretend none of this had ever happened. But she couldn't. She picked it up with trembling fingers and pocketed it. Before she could leave, a sudden sharp sound split the night air. A gunshot, somewhere close. Jenna dropped low instinctively, heart hammering, scanning the darkness. Another shot rang out, this time closer. Whoever had orchestrated this meeting wasn't interested in a quiet warning anymore. They wanted blood. She sprinted back to her car, flooring the gas pedal, tires screaming against the asphalt as she tore down the back roads toward her apartment. She didn't stop until she was deep into the suburban sprawl, lights and people all around her. Once inside, she locked the door, pulled the blinds, and shoved the USB into an old laptop she rarely used. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a single video file popped up, labeled "Watch Me." Hands shaking, Jenna clicked it. The video was grainy, clearly taken from a hidden camera, but what she saw made her blood turn to ice. It was footage of Sergeant Clark, meeting with a man Jenna recognized only vaguely from old photos Martin had once shown her. It was B. Carter. Alive. Not scrubbed from history. Not dead. Very much alive, and apparently pulling strings from the shadows. In the video, Clark handed Carter a thick manila envelope, and Carter slid him a stack of cash in return. No words were exchanged, but the implication was crystal clear. The man she had trusted most was part of the conspiracy all along. But before she could process it, another file began autoplaying. This one was different, audio only. It was a recording of Martin Simmons himself, his voice strained and desperate, saying words Jenna never expected to hear. "If anything happens to me, it's because I found out the truth about her. She isn't who she says she is. She's dangerous. She knows everything." Jenna recoiled like she had been slapped. Her? Was Martin talking about her? Or someone else entirely? The walls around her world were crumbling fast, and Jenna realized with horrifying clarity that she had no idea who she could trust anymore, or even who she really was in this nightmare. And somewhere out there, hidden in the dark, the real enemy was still watching, still waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Would you like me to continue right into the next escalation where Jenna must decide whether to confront Clark, or maybe introduce a totally new ally who might not be what they seem either? Rocket. Should I keep it at this heart-pounding level? Jenna slammed the laptop shut, her breathing ragged as if she had just sprinted a mile. Her mind was a whirlpool of panic and confusion, the lines between ally and enemy blurring faster than she could comprehend. Every muscle in her body screamed for her to run, to disappear, to sever any ties to the people who had dragged her into this nightmare. But even as she packed a small bag with essentials, cash, identification, a few clothes, she knew deep down there was no real escape. Whoever was behind this wasn't just toying with her. They were orchestrating every move she made, driving her towards some inevitable end. Her phone buzzed again, and she nearly dropped it in fright. Another text, but this time no words, just a video file. Against her better judgment, she opened it. The shaky footage showed a place she recognized immediately, her parents' home, the old colonial house where she had spent countless summers growing up. The camera zoomed in on the front door, then on the large bay window, where her mother often sat reading at night. And then, a gloved hand placed a bullet casing neatly on the porch step, right where her mother would find it. Jenna's chest tightened until it was hard to breathe. This wasn't about her anymore. They were threatening her family. A fresh wave of terror coursed through her veins, sharper and more suffocating than anything she had felt before. She grabbed her car keys and bolted out the door, her mind screaming a single frantic thought: get to them first. Save them. She didn't even notice the dark SUV parked half a block down until her tires screeched pulling out of the lot and she caught its headlights swinging into the street behind her. At first, she told herself it was coincidence. Paranoia. She had seen enough true crime stories to know how easy it was to lose perspective when fear took over. But every turn she made, every detour, the SUV stayed with her, always just far enough back to seem innocent, but close enough to let her know she was being watched. She gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white, her brain spinning through every possible option. Calling the police was out of the question. If Sergeant Clark was dirty, who else could she trust? Her foot pressed harder on the gas, weaving recklessly through the nighttime traffic, heart hammering a frantic rhythm in her chest. She tried to lose the SUV by cutting through a crowded shopping center parking lot, doubling back through side streets she barely knew, but no matter what she did, they stayed with her. It was like they were toying with her, letting her think she might get away just to crush her hope at the last second. When she finally pulled into her parents' driveway, the SUV had disappeared, melted back into the darkness, but the damage was already done. Whoever these people were, they had the power to track her every move, to manipulate the people around her, to plant evidence and erase lives like it was nothing. And now they had made it painfully clear. She wasn't just in danger. She was the target. Every second she stayed in one place, every minute she kept breathing, she was defying someone who would rather see her buried than exposed. Her head spun with fear and exhaustion, but she forced herself back into her car, heading nowhere in particular, just away from anyone she loved. As she drove aimlessly through the dark streets, she caught sight of a figure standing under a broken streetlight, someone tall, hooded, face obscured by shadow. She barely slowed down, not trusting her instincts anymore, but in that split second as she passed, the figure lifted a hand, and Jenna's heart seized. In the figure's hand was a Polaroid photograph, held out like a twisted offering. She couldn't see it clearly, but deep down, she already knew. It was a photo of her. Maybe from earlier that day. Maybe from years ago. It didn't matter. They were everywhere. Watching. Waiting. Closing in. They agreed to stay with neighbors for the night, somewhere safe and unpredictable, and as Jenna watched them drive away, a hollow ache settled deep in her bones. She felt utterly alone, banging on the door so hard she thought she might break it down. Her mother opened the door, startled, robe wrapped tight around her, a paperback novel clutched in one hand. Jenna didn't give her a chance to ask questions. She shoved past her, locking the door, bolting every window, checking every shadow twice. Her father came downstairs, confused and irritated, but the second Jenna showed him the video on her phone, the color drained from his face. They believed her now, at least about the threat, even if they didn't understand the why. And how could they? Jenna didn't even understand it herself. She stumbled out of the car, running up the steps. Jenna didn't stop. She didn't look back. But the feeling stayed with her, the suffocating certainty that no matter where she ran, no matter what truths she uncovered, she was already ensnared in a game she couldn't win. She gripped the steering wheel and blinked back the tears burning her eyes, vowing to herself she wouldn't go down without a fight. She needed answers. She needed to know why Martin Simmons had warned about her in that desperate final message.
Who was he talking about?
Who had gotten to him before he could tell the full truth? Was it someone she already knew, someone she trusted even now? The questions spun out like a spider's web, each thread sticky with doubt and dread. She had to find the next piece of the puzzle. She had to stay alive long enough to understand the real game at play. But somewhere deep inside, Jenna felt the chilling certainty settle. The worst was still ahead. Would you like me to keep building from here into an even darker twist, like Jenna uncovering a shocking betrayal from someone she thought was her only ally? Waxing crescent moon. Jenna sat in the corner booth of a 24-hour diner, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee, she hadn't touched. The place smelled of burnt toast and old grease, but it was one of the few places left in town where she felt anonymous, just another weary soul nursing caffeine and bad decisions. She stared out the rain-speckled window, mind racing, nerves shot to pieces. Every time the door chimed, she flinched, expecting a gloved hand to close around her shoulder or a shadowy figure to slip into the seat across from her. Instead, it was someone she hadn't thought about in years, Daniel Reeves, her ex-boyfriend, the boy next door who had once promised her the world before disappearing without a word after high school graduation. He looked different now, rougher around the edges, haunted. And before she could even ask how he found her, he slid into the booth and said something that made her blood turn to ice. "You're not supposed to be alive." For a moment, Jenna could only blink at him, her mind refusing to process what she had just heard. Daniel glanced nervously around the diner, lowering his voice. He told her about a project she had never known existed, a secret experiment tied to a biotech company based right in their sleepy little town. Apparently, years ago, Jenna's name had been flagged in a quiet program that monitored promising young minds for special recruitment. The catch was it wasn't for college scholarships or internships. It was something far more sinister. The company, known publicly for medical breakthroughs, was privately obsessed with psychological conditioning and predictive behavior modeling. They had been manipulating people like her from the shadows for years, tracking them, steering them toward life choices without their consent, using them as unwilling test subjects. And then came the real punch. Jenna hadn't been the only one. Martin Simmons, the man whose death had launched her into this nightmare, had been part of the same cohort. He hadn't stumbled onto a random crime. He had been trying to expose the program before they could silence him for good. The message he left behind, the clue Jenna had been chasing, wasn't about some petty murder or random betrayal. It was about the truth buried beneath everything. The hidden clue everyone missed wasn't in the files, or the photos, or the videos. It was in Jenna herself. She wasn't the hunter. She was the experiment gone wrong. And the people chasing her weren't after justice. They were after containment. Daniel leaned in closer, his voice trembling now. He told her that Martin had passed a final piece of evidence to someone he trusted, but it wasn't Jenna. It was Daniel himself. And now Daniel was in just as much danger as she was. As he pulled a battered USB drive from his pocket and slid it across the table to her, Jenna's mind reeled. Everything she thought she knew, the warnings, the threats, the fear, had been a smokescreen. She was never meant to uncover the truth. She was meant to be erased quietly, efficiently, like a glitch in the system. And now, because she had fought back, because she had refused to fall in line, she had drawn the full, merciless attention of the people who had orchestrated everything from the start. Jenna clutched the USB drive in her sweaty palm, 1,000 new questions clawing at her brain. Why her? Why now? How deep did this conspiracy go? Her memories, innocent moments from her childhood, random opportunities, old friendships, all flashed through a new, terrifying lens. What had been real?
Who had been genuine?
Had she ever made a single choice freely, or had every step been engineered from the shadows? Before she could even begin to process it all, Daniel stiffened, his eyes darting toward the front door. Jenna followed his gaze just in time to see two men step inside, their movements smooth, practiced, their gazes slicing through the diner like scalpels. Without another word, Daniel grabbed her hand and yanked her from the booth. They bolted through the kitchen, knocking over trays and dishes, the shouts of the cook fading behind them as they burst out into the alley. The cold rain slapped Jenna's face, snapping her fully into the moment. They didn't have time to think. Only to run. Only to survive. And as they disappeared into the night, Jenna realized the most horrifying truth yet. The real enemy wasn't just hunting her. Would you like me to continue into the next major twist, where Jenna unlocks the USB and discovers a betrayal closer than she ever imagined? Fire. Jenna didn't stop running until the night swallowed them whole, their soaked sneakers slapping against the empty pavement, breath coming in ragged gasps. They ducked into a crumbling, abandoned warehouse at the edge of town, the broken windows and graffiti-stained walls offering a grim kind of shelter. She collapsed against the wall, heart hammering in her chest, clutching the USB drive like it was the only thing tethering her to reality. Daniel locked the door behind them, jamming a metal rod through the handles for good measure. For a long, breathless moment, they just stood there, listening to the rain hammer the roof, waiting for footsteps that, miraculously, didn't come. But the illusion of safety was fragile, and deep down Jenna knew it wouldn't last. She slid down the wall to the floor, fumbling with the battered laptop Daniel had stashed in his backpack. Her fingers shook as she inserted the USB drive. It clicked into place with a sound that seemed way too loud in the cavernous emptiness around them. The files were heavily encrypted, but Daniel had the password. It was a code word only Martin would have known. When the screen finally unlocked, Jenna's stomach twisted into knots. Photos, video clips, emails, names. Not just hers. Dozens of others. Friends, co-workers, teachers. People she had trusted without a second thought. Among them was a face that made her blood run cold. Her best friend, Lila. The one person she had called when everything first started unraveling. The one person she had leaned on, confided in, trusted with every fear and suspicion. Lila had been one of them all along. Jenna couldn't breathe. It felt like the floor was tilting underneath her. Daniel put a hand on her shoulder, steadying her as she scrolled through the damning evidence. Texts between Lila and a company handler, meeting logs detailing Jenna's movements, reports on her psychological responses to staged, random events. Every friendship, every moment of vulnerability had been watched, dissected, manipulated. Lila had been reporting on her like she was some kind of lab rat. And worse, she was still out there, still playing the part of the loyal friend, still feeding Jenna lies to keep her from realizing the truth until it was too late. As the full weight of betrayal settled over her, Jenna felt something inside her snap. Rage, grief, terror, they all blurred into one blinding force. She could run. She could disappear, try to start a new life under a different name, leave the truth buried, and hope the hunters eventually lost interest. Or she could confront Lila, force her to admit the truth, dig out every hidden secret, and finally expose the monsters pulling the strings. But doing that would mean stepping straight into the trap they had laid for her. If she confronted Lila, she'd be risking everything, her freedom, her life, maybe even Daniel's. And if she didn't, she would be letting them win without even putting up a fight. Daniel crouched beside her, his voice low, urgent. "We have to go.
Now. We can still get out of this.
We just have to be smart, Jenna. Forget her. Forget all of it. We can disappear." But Jenna couldn't tear her eyes away from Lila's smiling face staring back at her from the laptop screen, mocking her with the memory of every fake promise, every comforting lie. A part of her wanted to believe Daniel, to run, to hide, to survive. But another part, the part that refused to be a pawn anymore, knew she could never live with herself if she turned her back on the truth now. Even if it destroyed her. Even if it meant playing right into their hands. The decision clawed at her insides, ripping her apart. The easy choice meant surrendering to fear, living a half-life always looking over her shoulder. The hard choice meant risking everything for the slim chance at real freedom, not just for her, but for everyone else still caught in the web they didn't even know existed. Jenna wiped a shaking hand across her face, forcing herself to think, to breathe, to choose. The rain battered the broken windows harder, the wind howling like a warning. And just as she opened her mouth to answer Daniel, her phone buzzed. One new message. No number. Just 2 words that sent a fresh spike of terror through her veins. "We see you. Would you like me to keep going into the intense confrontation where Jenna faces Lila, but finds out an even deeper betrayal is waiting for her? Fire." Jenna's fingers hovered over her phone screen, the simple text message searing into her brain like a brand. Daniel was already grabbing the laptop, shoving the USB drive back into his pocket, muttering under his breath about getting off the grid. But Jenna barely heard him. The world had narrowed into a cold, blinding tunnel of dread. They were being watched still, even now, even after all the running, the hiding, the desperate moves to stay a step ahead. Somehow, The hunters had always been there, just out of sight, her every move playing right into their hands. She rose to her feet slowly, heart thundering, and finally turned to Daniel with a question that had been clawing at the back of her mind for hours now. How were they being tracked if their phones had been wiped, their car abandoned, their devices destroyed? They had been inside her life all along, hiding behind familiar faces, old memories, and trusted promises. And now that she knew, they wouldn't stop until she was silenced for good. Daniel looked at her, his face a mask of panic and exhaustion, and in that instant Jenna saw it. The hesitation. The microsecond where his eyes darted away, where his mouth opened, but no words came out. And everything inside her twisted violently. She backed away, pulse spiking as a horrible realization sank in. It hadn't been Lila who led them into this trap. It had been Daniel all along.
The room seemed to spin.
Jenna shook her head, refusing to believe it, but pieces of memory started clicking into place. The way Daniel always insisted on choosing their hideouts, the way he conveniently found the hidden laptop, the way he always seemed a little too calm, a little too prepared, when everything else was falling apart. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body was frozen in place as Daniel stepped closer, hands up in a mockery of reassurance. "Jenna, listen to me," he said, voice low, soothing, like someone talking down a spooked animal. "It's not what you think. I had no choice. They have my sister. If I didn't help them, they said they'd kill her." The words hit her like a physical blow. Betrayal laced with desperation, guilt bleeding into every syllable. Jenna's mind raced. She believed him. Part of her did, but it didn't matter. Choices had already been made. Lines had already been crossed. And now, she was trapped between two monsters, the faceless organization closing in from the shadows, and the one person she thought she could trust, standing right in front of her with betrayal heavy in his eyes.
"Ed?"
Before she could respond, headlights sliced through the shattered windows, the low rumble of engines filling the air. Jenna bolted for the back exit, shoving Daniel aside when he tried to grab her arm. Before she could respond, headlights sliced through the shattered windows, the low rumble of engines filling the air. Jenna bolted for the back exit, shoving Daniel aside when he tried to grab her arm. She burst out into the rain, her breath catching in her throat as she stumbled into the mud. Black SUVs lined the street like vultures, figures in tactical gear pouring out, shouting orders. She ran, heart hammering so loud she could barely hear, but they were everywhere, around every corner, behind every crumbling building, cutting off every escape route. And just when it seemed like she would be swallowed whole, a deafening crack split the air, a gunshot, and the world exploded into chaos. Jenna hit the ground, covering her head instinctively, heart stuttering in terror. Somewhere behind her, Daniel screamed. More shots followed, screams, orders shouted over radios. It wasn't just the hunters. Someone else had arrived. Another group, another faction she hadn't even known existed. As she crawled through the rain-slicked alleyways, Jenna caught a glimpse of them. Dark-clad figures moving with brutal efficiency, gunning down the very people who had been chasing her moments before. They weren't here to rescue her. They were here to take the prize she didn't even realize she carried. The files, the evidence, the secrets that could burn everything down. And now Jenna understood. This wasn't just about her. This was about control, about power, about a network so vast and insidious it reached into every corner of society, law enforcement, government, corporations. She was just a thread in the web, but if she pulled hard enough, the entire structure could unravel. That was why they wanted her alive. That was why they couldn't let her slip away. Because buried in the files she had stolen was the key to everything. The names, the transactions, the hidden experiments, the dark deals that could bring the whole operation crashing down if exposed. But now, caught between two ruthless enemies and nowhere left to run, Jenna realized something chilling. She might not survive long enough to expose the truth. And even worse, there was someone else still hidden in the shadows, someone even more dangerous than Daniel or Lila, someone who had been manipulating the game from the very beginning. Would you like me to dive into the explosive final confrontation where Jenna uncovers the real puppet master and realizes the worst betrayal of all? Fire. The storm raged on as Jenna pressed her back against the soaked brick wall, every nerve in her body thrumming with fear and adrenaline. In the distance, she could still hear the chaos, the firefight between the two factions, the low, furious shouts of men who knew they were losing control. Clutching the blood-streaked USB drive in her fist, she knew this was it. No more running. No more hiding. The truth was within reach, but to expose it, she would have to walk right into the lion's den. She glanced down at the text that had appeared on her cracked phone screen minutes ago. Come alone. Rooftop. Midnight. Or it all ends. There was no signature, no hint of identity, but Jenna already knew who was calling her out. The real architect behind everything. The one who had been pulling the strings from the very beginning, orchestrating every betrayal, every twist, every trap. And Jenna knew she had no choice but to answer. The rooftop was a wasteland of broken antennas and rusted HVAC units, the wind howling so violently it almost drowned out the faint hum of city lights below. She spotted him almost immediately, a solitary figure standing near the edge, hands tucked casually into the pockets of a long, rain-slicked coat. It wasn't Lila. It wasn't even Daniel. As Jenna stepped closer, heart hammering, the figure turned, and her stomach dropped into her shoes. It was Special Agent Reed, the man who had first helped her after the first threats began, the one who had comforted her, protected her, reassured her that the system would bring the criminals to justice. The same man who now watched her with cold, reptilian eyes, a faint smirk playing across his lips. You made it, he said, his voice almost lost in the wind. Smart girl. I knew you would. Jenna stood frozen, the weight of betrayal crushing down on her. Every memory of Reed's reassuring words, his promises, twisted now into grotesque mockeries. She forced herself to find her voice. Why? She demanded, her hands trembling with rage and grief. Why betray me? Reed's smirk widened as he took a slow step toward her. You still don't get it, do you? He said almost pityingly. It was never about you. You were just a courier, a convenient scapegoat if things went sideways. We needed someone to steal the files, someone who would take all the heat while we cleaned house behind the scenes. You played your role perfectly. The truth hit her like a freight train. All the chasing, all the terror, it hadn't been about stopping her. It had been about controlling the leak, making sure only the right pieces of information surfaced, and silencing anyone who knew too much. She was never meant to survive this. Reed had always intended to wipe her away, just another casualty buried under mountains of classified lies. Jenna tightened her grip on the USB drive, feeling the sharp edges dig into her palm. You're not getting this, she said through gritted teeth. Reed chuckled, pulling a sleek pistol from his coat. You think you have a choice? For a second, the world held its breath. And then Jenna made her move, throwing herself sideways just as Reed fired. The bullet whistled past her ear as she scrambled behind a concrete vent. The rooftop erupted into chaos again, gunshots ricocheting off metal, the roar of the storm swallowing her gasps for air. She ducked and weaved, moving instinctively, Reed's furious shouts chasing her through the maze of debris. She had no weapon, no backup, no plan. All she had was the drive and the truth. And somehow, she knew that was enough. Ducking low, Jenna yanked out her phone with shaking fingers and slid the USB drive into the port. It took a precious, agonizing second for the device to recognize the connection. Another shot rang out, and concrete exploded inches from her face. Reed was closing in fast. Heart hammering, she opened her secure cloud server and hit upload. The files, the evidence, began to pour into the internet like wildfire, unstoppable now. Reed rounded the corner, gun raised, murder flashing in his eyes. But before he could pull the trigger, a deafening roar tore through the rooftop as a helicopter's spotlight exploded into life above them. Tactical teams in black gear rappelled down ropes, weapons trained squarely on Reed. Shouts filled the air. Drop your weapon. Hands where we can see them. Reed froze, realization dawning too late. He had been outmaneuvered. Jenna wasn't alone after all. And that's when the final twist dropped. An older woman in a sharp suit stepped forward from the shadows, her badge gleaming under the spotlight. "Agent Reed," she said, voice cutting through the chaos, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and treason against the United States government." Reed's face crumpled into fury and betrayal as he dropped his gun with a clatter. Jenna watched, numb with shock, as the agents cuffed him and led him away. She turned to the woman, Director Monroe, the real leader of the FBI's Internal Investigations Unit, who had been secretly building a case against Reed's shadow network for years. "You did good," Monroe said, giving Jenna a nod of respect. As the storm began to break and dawn's first light bled into the sky, Jenna stood atop the battered rooftop, soaked, bruised, exhausted, but free. The truth was out. The conspiracy shattered. But deep inside, she knew this was just the beginning. Because in a world built on lies, exposing the truth was only the first battle. And somewhere, deep in the shadows, others were already watching, already planning their next move. Would you like me to continue with an epilogue to wrap up Jenna's story and hint at an even bigger mystery still lurking beneath the surface? Better than most of our own.